Mufasa the Lion King sadly suffers from the same problems as the 2019 Lion King, and after watching this movie, in my opinion, I just don't think we really needed it, so let's talk about it. Now, if you want to see what I gave this movie out of 10, head over to my shorts, TikTok, or Instagram and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. And if you've already seen the movie, let me know in the comments your thoughts on it. But without further ado, let's talk about Mufasa the Lion King. So this movie obviously follows the origin story of Mufasa and his relationship with Scar and how they eventually split, while also showing us how he was introduced to Sarabi, Zazu, and Rafiki on his way to becoming king. Jumping right into the good, and the first thing I have here is the visuals. Now, as much as I don't care for this movie, I have to say the visuals are phenomenal. The 2019 Lion King got a lot of criticism, but the visuals were not one of them, and for me, that goes the same for this movie. It's just amazing to see how far that technology has come in a short 5 years. I mean, everything from the way the animals moved, looked, and even the way their fur moved with the wind and in the wind in this thing just had so much detail. We also got tons of landscape shots of this world that were just beautiful to look at, and just like the 2019 Lion King, I think this movie is another step forward in what can be done in the live action / photorealism space. Next up for the good, I have the music. Now, overall, I thought the music was pretty solid. It wasn't my favorite from Lin-Manuel Miranda, but there was still some catchy songs in there. I've always been a fan of his music in movies, and at this point, I just think Disney needs to hire him full-time to do all of the music in their movies, because he always does a pretty good job in my opinion, and his presence was definitely missed in Moana 2. My only negative with the songs is that it just kind of felt like the music in this thing popped up at random moments at times, but other than that, I was cool with it. It didn't feel like this movie stopped the story at all and they were just singing just to sing, and it also felt like each song that was performed in this movie meant something to the character that was singing it. And I think that's really important for musicals because in my opinion, it adds to the story just like the music added to the story in this movie. And finally for the good is Erin as Mufasa. Now, it is impossible to follow up the great James Earl Jones and do what he did for the character of Mufasa, but Erin stepped in and did a solid job. And also, he can sing a little bit too, and that kind of surprised me. I thought the voice acting was good all around in this thing. Rafiki was my favorite character, and in my opinion, he's the best character in this movie, but the trio of Erin, Tiffany Boone, and Kelvin Harrison Jr. was really good as Mufasa, Sarabi, and Scar. I thought the chemistry was there, and it was really cool to see how that trio came together in this movie. Moving on to the so-so, and the only thing I have here is that Scar's turn was really quick, and it didn't feel earned at all, in my opinion. Now, obviously, the thing I was most excited to see in this movie is how Scar and Mufasa became enemies, and we do learn a little bit more about Scar's character in this, but they don't really tease him turning evil until it actually happens. Essentially, this whole movie, you could see that Scar didn't have the qualities of a king, and he was actually kind of a coward in this movie, but not once did they hint or tease at him having an evil side. Actually, him and Mufasa were pretty cool throughout this entire movie until they weren't, and the reason they gave us for them splitting just was weak in my opinion and felt unearned. His turn happened so quickly that it felt rushed, abrupt, and if we didn't know that Scar was a villain before going into this movie, it would have felt completely out of character for him in my opinion. I just wish they would have given us a couple more hints throughout the movie that Scar does have a bad side, so when he eventually did turn later in the movie, it didn't feel so rushed and abrupt. Also, I just have to add that this movie gives an origin story for literally everything in The Lion King. Like, even Rafiki's stick gets a little origin story in this movie. Finally, getting into the bad, and in my opinion, I do think this movie had some pacing issues. Now, the start of this thing was a little bumpy in my opinion. It was kind of rough, and I was like, oh no, this movie could be terrible, but thankfully it did get a little bit better after that, but it just kind of felt like this thing stumbled into the main story. When it comes to the pacing, this thing would cut back to Timon and Pumbaa at random times during the story, and that would just stop and kind of mess with the whole flow of this film. And you could make an argument that Timon and Pumbaa weren't really needed in this movie at all, because at the end of the day, it was Rafiki telling the story of Mufasa to Kiara. We honestly could could have just started with Rafiki and Kiara, told the story of Mufasa, and then ended with Rafiki and Kiara. And as much as I love Timon and Pumbaa, I think this movie would have been just fine without them. Plus, on top of that, I did feel like this movie dragged a little bit in the middle right before we got to the third act. Next up for the bad, and this is really just a me thing, but I thought this movie lacked that magic and didn't really have a spark to it. Now, I think we can all agree that there was a certain magic about that original animated film that came out in '94. And sadly, just like the live action movie, this movie doesn't have that magic to it. I'm not trying to compare it to that original film because that film is a classic and will always be one of my favorite Disney movies of all time, and it is a very high bar to match. But this one just didn't have that spark that really got you invested in the story. And that's why, even though I think this movie does do some good things, at the end of the day, it just felt dull for me. So overall, this movie is just fine. It's got great visuals and some solid music, and it was cool to see where our favorite characters came from, but the story just wasn't there for me, and I never truly felt invested in it. And that's why I'd probably put this in the same bucket as the 2019 Lion King film. Those are my thoughts on Mufasa, the Lion King. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the movie down in the comments, and as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.